In today's world, being alone isn't just misunderstood, it's punished. You're taught that solitude is failure, that if you're not in a relationship, not constantly surrounded by people, not posting your every thought for the crowd, something must be wrong with you. But behind this obsessive worship of connection lies a far more disturbing truth. While millions drown in shallow conversations, empty validation, and desperate searches for approval, there exists a different kind of person. Someone quiet, unattached, unafraid of being alone. And that makes them dangerous. Not because they're violent, not because they're cruel, but because they're free. In a society built on need, a man who doesn't need anything breaks the game. He doesn't chase status. He doesn't crave attention. He doesn't bend to expectations. He doesn't follow trends. He doesn't worship celebrities. He doesn't need applause. He thinks for himself, feels for himself, lives for himself, and that is terrifying to the system. Ask yourself, why does independence disturb people? Why does a man who doesn't seek approval feel threatening? Why is it that the moment you stop performing for others, the world starts asking, what's wrong with you? Let's be clear. This is not about becoming a loner. This is about becoming sovereign, about understanding why a man who doesn't depend on others is not broken. He's a threat to the way things are. Picture this. You walk into a noisy cafe, screens glowing, people scrolling, laughter, stories, constant stimulation. Someone's bragging about a trip. Someone else is filming a story for Instagram. Everyone's broadcasting, hoping someone will care. And in the middle of it all, there's one man sitting alone. No phone, no conversation, no need. He's listening to philosophy on his headphones. Marcus Aurelius, Nietzsche, Epictetus. He's not trying to be seen. He's not waiting to be invited in. He's present, anchored, still. And everyone around him can feel it, even if they don't understand why it bothers them. Why is he alone? Why isn't he talking? Why does he look so calm? They'll label him strange, closed off, arrogant. But what they're actually feeling is fear. Because when you meet someone who doesn't need validation, you meet someone you can't control. You can't manipulate him with rejection. You can't guilt him with silence. You can't trigger him with social pressure. And that makes him untouchable. The truth is, modern society is engineered to keep you wanting. They teach you, you're not whole without a partner. You're not successful without a brand. You're not valuable unless the world sees it and likes it. Everything, from advertising to apps to influencers, is designed to feed one belief. You are incomplete, and only through the external world can you become enough. But here's the secret no one tells you. That's not culture. That's not community. That's control. A man who constantly feels lacking is easy to manage. He'll buy more, work more, chase harder, try to fit into someone else's idea of normal. But the man who steps out of this cycle, he becomes a glitch in the system. He stops playing the game. And worse, he starts asking the questions no one wants to hear. Why? Who benefits from my insecurity? What if I don't need any of this? That's when they start calling you cold, difficult, disconnected. But they're not afraid of your silence. They're afraid of what it reveals. That so many connections today aren't built on love. They're built on need. And if you don't need, you can't be manipulated. You become unshakable. A man like that isn't just strange to the world. He's dangerous to it, because he reminds everyone else that freedom is possible. And that terrifies those who depend on control. They say freedom is a beautiful thing, but they never tell you what it costs. From the moment you were a child, you were taught one simple message. To be alone is to be broken. The child who plays by himself? Something's wrong. The teenager who doesn't hang out every weekend? He's weird. The adult without a partner, a family, a tribe? Clearly something went off track. This belief isn't just a social habit. It's embedded in culture, in language, in economics. Because the truth is uncomfortable, modern society doesn't thrive on freedom. It thrives on deficiency. The more incomplete you feel, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to sell to, manage, and manipulate. So what do? They teach you to fear solitude, and then they monetize that fear. Look closer. Why does nearly every ad show people laughing, smiling, surrounded by others? Why do dating apps sell not connection, but the illusion of limitless options? Why is success always tied to how many people are watching, applauding, liking? Because a person who can't be alone will always be dependent on likes, on messages, on approval, on the next hit of significance. That's not human nature. That's programming. Every morning you wake up and check your phone. Who messaged me? Who reacted to what I posted? Who still sees me? And the moment there's silence, you feel it. That subtle panic, that whisper of emptiness, that craving to be seen just for a second so you don't feel like you've disappeared, but instead of facing that discomfort, you run from it. You scroll, you post, you click, you talk to anyone about anything, as long as you don't have to hear your own mind, and the world calls this normal. But let's be honest, it's not connection. It's addiction. You've been trained to fill every silent moment with noise. Music, podcasts, texts, screens, news, updates, more updates. Why? Because silence reveals the truth. And the truth is this: you've never been taught how to be alone without feeling unworthy. That's not your fault. It's the design. A dependent population is a controllable population. A person who can't sit still with their own thoughts will do anything to escape them. They'll work harder, buy more, chase status, perform emotions they don't feel. They'll keep running and call it success. But what happens when someone stops? When someone says, "I don't need your noise. I don't need to be seen to feel real. I don't need to perform to feel worthy." That person becomes a problem. A man like that can't be manipulated by shame. He doesn't fold under peer pressure. He's immune to emotional blackmail. He becomes still, and stillness is dangerous. Let me be clear. Solitude is not loneliness, it's space. Space to see clearly, to feel without interruption, to notice the subtle architecture of a world built on insecurity. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to notice that most conversations aren't about truth, they're about approval. That most relationships aren't about love, they're about avoiding emptiness. That most identities aren't real, they're masks shaped by the fear of rejection. And suddenly, you stop chasing. You stop needing the next fix of being wanted, because you realize your worth isn't earned in the crowd, it's remembered in the quiet. That's why people hate the one who stands alone. Not because he's cold, but because he's a mirror. He reflects everything they're still running from. Their craving for attention, their addiction to distraction, their terror of being forgotten. And the man who's comfortable in solitude, he sees it all. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't chase, he just remains. And that makes him a threat, not to people, but to the system that feeds on their fear. Now imagine this man. He walks into a cafe. He's not looking around, not checking his phone, not trying to be noticed. He sits down, puts on his headphones, and listens to a philosophy audiobook. No scrolling, no performance, no urgency, just stillness. And you know what people around him feel? Discomfort. They glance. They whisper. They wonder. Why is he alone? Why is he so quiet? What's wrong with him? Because in a world addicted to attention, a person who doesn't need it becomes suspicious. We've been conditioned to equate visibility with value. The more people see you, react to you, follow you, the more real you feel. So when someone stops chasing that, they feel unreal, unreachable, untouchable. And that's exactly why the system tries to label them. They're strange. They're antisocial. They're arrogant. No, they're just whole. And a whole man can't be controlled. There's a dangerous assumption built into modern life, that if you're not part of the noise, you're irrelevant. That if you don't belong to a group, you don't matter. That if you don't broadcast your life, you're not really living. But this is a lie, and it serves only one purpose: to make you doubt your own center. Because a man who doubts himself will always look outside for confirmation. And the moment you do that, you give away your power. The system doesn't need to silence you. It just needs to keep you needy. Craving applause, begging for likes, desperate to be included, because that craving turns you into a consumer. Not just of products, but of people. You consume conversations to feel important. You consume validation to feel whole. You consume identity to feel like you belong. And every day the machine feeds you more, not truth, not wisdom, not peace, just more noise. But there's another kind of man, the one who no longer consumes noise to silence his fear, the one who doesn't flinch in solitude. The one who walks alone, not as a victim but as a sovereign. That man doesn't buy his worth. He remembers it. He doesn't need permission. He already exists, and that shakes the foundation of a world that survives by selling you the opposite. Modern society is built on insecurity. That's why everything you're told is designed to trigger it. You're not successful unless, you're not desirable until, you're not complete without. This isn't random. It's control, because a man who feels incomplete will always keep buying. More clothes, more status, more people to fill the void. And a man who doesn't? He stops the game. And when you stop playing the game, you become unrecognizable. That's when people start asking, why are you different? Why don't you care what others think? Why aren't you chasing the same things we are? But the truth is, you used to. You used to beg for attention, to shrink yourself to fit in, to chase love just to feel enough. Until one day, you stopped. Not because you gave up, but because you woke up. You saw through the lie that your value is based on what you can get from others, when in reality, it was always based on what you could stand without. That's what terrifies people. Not that you're arrogant, but that you're free. Free from the chase, free from the noise, free from the need to prove. And once a man tastes that kind of freedom, he doesn't go back. Not because he's cold, but because he's finally real. But here's the catch. The moment you stop playing by the rules, you stop being relatable. People don't know what to do with a man who doesn't need them. And so they project. He's cold. He's too intense. He must be hiding something. But that's not true. He's just stopped leaking energy. He's stopped performing, stopped explaining, stopped molding himself to fit other people's expectations. And that silence? It's not emptiness, it's power. You were trained to believe that connection means availability, that love means constant access, that kindness means self-erasure. But what if that's the lie? What if connection has nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with clarity? What if the most magnetic man is the one who stays rooted while the world begs him to bend? You see, there's a moment in every man's life when the external world stops working. The applause stops feeling good, the messages feel hollow, the parties feel loud but not alive, and in that quiet disillusionment, something ancient wakes up. It whispers, "This is not it. This isn't what strength feels like. This isn't what intimacy feels like. This isn't what freedom feels like." You start craving something deeper. Not more people, not more validation, but more stillness, more space, more truth. And suddenly your old life starts to feel like a costume that no longer fits. Here's what no one tells you. Growth feels like isolation. At first, because the moment you stop pretending, you start losing things. You lose conversations you no longer want to have. You lose friendships that were built on shared weakness. You lose the identity that made everyone else feel safe around you. And in that loss, you gain yourself, not the version of you that's approved, but the one that's whole. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, but every night he sat in silence, journaling his thoughts, confronting his ego, asking questions like, what did I desire today that I didn't need? Where did I act out of fear, not wisdom? What did I do just to be liked? He didn't do this for show. He did it because he knew. A man who doesn't rule himself rules nothing. His solitude wasn't weakness, it was his discipline. Because when the world offered him everything, he still chose stillness. Now contrast that with the world you live in, where solitude is seen as failure, where being alone means something's wrong, where quiet men are treated like problems to be fixed. But what if solitude isn't a curse? What if it's a filter? What if it's the space that reveals what's real, and what was just noise you called love? Nietzsche went even further. He said, the individual must struggle not to be overcome by the tribe. Because the tribe doesn't care about truth, it only cares about safety, about sameness, about control. So the moment you start thinking for yourself, you become a threat. Not because you're wrong, but because you're free. And freedom breaks the script. This is the turning point. You realize that being alone isn't loneliness, it's sovereignty. It's the ability to sit in silence without collapsing, to walk without followers, to speak without permission, to feel whole without applause. And once you find that, you don't chase people anymore. Because the people who are meant for you don't need to be chased. They recognize your stillness as strength. They don't ask you to shrink. They don't flinch when you expand. They meet you in that same space with truth, with calm, with fire of their own. Let me ask you something brutal. When was the last time you were fully seen? Not for what you offer, not for how useful you are, but for your presence, your quiet, your stillness, your refusal to perform. If you can't remember, it's not your fault. You were trained to be consumed, to be understandable, to be normal. But freedom is never normal. It doesn't apologize, it doesn't explain, it just is. And that's why the world pushes back. You'll hear it. You've changed. You're too distant. You used to be more fun. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer easy to control. And that's terrifying. To them. Because when you stop needing permission to exist, you force others to confront their own dependency. You become a mirror, a reminder of everything they've suppressed, the questions they avoided, the emotions they numbed, the life they postponed. And instead of joining your freedom, they reject it. Not because you're wrong, but because you're proof that they could have chosen differently. Now here's the part that no one glamorizes. Freedom has a price. It costs you comfort. It costs you company. Sometimes it even costs you love. But what you gain reality. Not the filtered version fed through validation. Not the temporary high of being accepted, but the raw, honest, painful beauty of living as yourself. Without masks, without roles, without scripts. That's why solitude isn't the enemy. It's the doorway. It's not the absence of connection. It's the beginning of real connection. Because once you stop needing people to complete you, you finally see who's strong enough to walk beside you. Not because they need your light, but because they burn just as bright. So what does it mean to be dangerous? It doesn't mean being violent. It doesn't mean being cruel. It means being unshakable. It means knowing who you are when the world forgets. It means refusing to bend just to be chosen. It means standing in silence while others scream for attention. Because you no longer need it. You've already met yourself, and that is enough. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a video. You're remembering something ancient, something they tried to take from you. your stillness, your depth, your right to be whole without applause. This isn't about being better, it's not about being above. It's about coming home. And the door was never locked. It was just hidden behind noise. Step into that silence and listen, because what you hear there is the sound of a man who's finally free.